Okay, we are recording. Gary Crowley, how are you today?
I'm very, very well. Thank you very much for asking. All good, all good. The sun's out. All is good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you've already been moaning at me, telling me that it's been a real
That was
bitch
our
to
little
try and.
secret.
So tell me, so have you found it tough picking this? I mean, obviously, your whole career has been immersed in music. So to kind of pick tunes, how tough was it?
Oh, absolutely. I think you reached out about a week ago, and I mean, I don't want to make you feel bad, Stu, but honestly, I've hardly slept over the last 7 nights. But yeah, because you're constantly going over your answers, and to use a popular phrase back in the 80s, remixing them
Yeah,
basically. So it has been quite a tough task, really, because these are important questions, and I want to be as honest as I can be as far as the answers are concerned. But I'm pretty happy. I think I'm pretty happy with what I've come up with today. I think so. It says here.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, I've been wanting to have this chat for a long time, Gary, and I'm going to get this little bit of fandom out of the way already. All right, so I'm going to get it out of the way before we crack on, right? So I mean, we'll talk about obviously the things that you've done, but I was a big fan of a lot of what you was doing in radio as a young lad, and that ties in with the recent release. And I was in an indie band in the mid '90s, and we was managed by Ricky Gervais. And Ricky, I took my demo of my new band in to see Ricky at XFM in Charlotte Street, and I remember sitting there, and there was like a room in Charlotte Street. I don't know if you remember. I'm sure you will, Gary. And there was like a couple of stereos in there, and I don't know. It wasn't like a studio. It was like some kind of, like, I don't know, where people would just sort of hang out and stuff. And I went in there with Ricky to play in my demo. And I was sitting there chatting to him, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, I really like that." And I was looking straight past him, and I was nudging my mate, and I went, "Fucking hell, Gary Crowley's tapping his foot to our demo," and like that. That was the crowning glory, mate. You was tapping your foot to me demo back in 1996, I think, or 97. Can't remember.
So, what did he take on managing you then after you coming into Charlotte Street and playing it to him?
No, no, he managed my previous band, and
Oh,
then basically I'd got a new band, and he was like, "Bring it up, let's have a listen to what you're up to." And so I popped in, and obviously the station hadn't been going that long, and I was obviously very keen to go in and have a little look about anyway, and yeah, so I sat there, and you was away with like a little notepad and pen, but you was tapping your foot to me demo, so that was it. Oh, my day was made, mate. It really was.
I mean, it's funny thinking back to that time, that year at XFM, because I don't know whether you've seen the documentary.
I'm really good friends with a fella called Jim Benner, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah, we love Jim Benner. Yeah.
And yeah, he's one of the real good guys. He's Jim, and he sent me the trailer for it, and I was like, oh my god, I need to see this, and I've not got round to seeing it yet. It looks phenomenal.
Well, get him to send you a link for it. I think it's up there on Amazon and some of the other platforms. But it is very, very good. It's a reminder of an exciting time, I think, as music is concerned, and also, you know. That first year, which to quote that old Dickens line, really was the best of times and also the worst of times. But the positives though were for pretty much just under a year, the lunatics were running the asylum, but the flip side of that is that all that sort of hope for the radio station, and that kind of terrific group of people, unfortunately it all sort of imploded, and a radio group ended up owning it that was I don't think was in the original kind of plan, really. But like I said, there were lots of really good positives about it, and when I think about some of those those other presenters, whether it was Eric Hodge doing the the breakfast show, Claire after me, if I remember correctly, Ian Canfield on Drive Time, and then I think it was either lovely John Kennedy first, but it might have been Keith Cameron, the writer, who was doing the kind of early evening show, and then maybe John sort of did the later slot. But I just remember, having the station on all the time at home, and just kind of buzzing really of what I was hearing, and sort of furiously writing down if I heard John play something, or Keith played something that I wanted to sort of play on my program. Yeah, a lot of kind of very, very positive memories. I mean, when I think back, Stu, to the playlist meetings, I mean, Jesus, I wish somebody had been filming these, because those were absolutely kind of surreal, but so much fun. And of course, this was all sort of pre-mobile phones, really, apart from those massive brick ones that maybe Chris Harry had, who kind of was the overall boss. Sammy might have had one as well, but certainly none of the minions like us had one of those. So yeah, I mean, there's a few photos kind of flying around, but just generally overall, for me to be presenting a mid-morning program where I not only had an influence as far as the playlist was concerned, all of the daytime radio presenters and evening ones, and occasionally some of the weekend ones as well, would have a hand in choosing the records that made it onto the playlist. But of course, you were given a lot of free choice as well. And it's a pity, because obviously the station got off to a very what's the word that I'm looking for? Not an ideal start, obviously, because Princess Diana sadly had passed away. I think on the Sunday morning before the Monday that the station had launched. So there was a lot of expectation. Because this was the final, IRL license, I think, that had been allocated in London and was going to be so for the next couple of years. So I think everybody was kind of expecting a bit of a ballyhoo about this, and it was a big deal that London was getting its first, alternative radio station. And long
as a listener, Gary, it was so exciting.
Yeah. And honestly, Stu, to be there in the middle of it was equally exciting. And so we were expecting a bit of a ballyhoo that Monday morning, and I think that in the end, a Swedish film crew turned up, and I think that was by default. They were meant to be going somewhere else. So the station, which was expecting to kind of be, to be launched with an explosion, basically started with a bit of a whimper. But but slowly but surely, I think we got the sound, the vibe of the radio station right. It took a couple of radar figures. Just in case anybody doesn't know who's listening to your podcast, Stu, are these kind of quarterly, summaries of your audience figures, basically. And it started, disappointingly, but it started to kind of build up. But slowly, I think after the third one, some of the the backers for the investors for the station started to bottle it somewhat, and then they started looking for a buyer, and that original sort of template and an idea for the station started to be kind of tinkered with, and it kind of sort of changed. But that first year was so exciting. I mean, some of the guests that we had coming in, there was a lot of there was a lot of support from a lot of the the bands, the artists of the time, which was really, really important and obviously kind of welcomed, and a lot of the record companies as well. I think they wanted to see it work. And at the beginning, we kind of sort of answered to ourselves, really. I think that's that's been pretty rare.
Yeah. We've fast tracked, Gary. I've got so much I want to go through, and we've gone straight. We've fast tracked straight to XFM. I'm going to take you back, and let's get the playlist started, and we'll drop back in with your journey as and when we get it through these tracks. So, track one, Gary. Tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please, mate.
Well, this has got to be one of the most the most sort of difficult questions to answer, because if you're a music fan, I mean, there's just absolutely there's thousands out there in the ether. I've decided to go with the Clash and White Man in Hammersmith Palais, because they were such an important band for me and my pals when we got into them at the beginning of 1977. I was very lucky. I went to school in the centre of London, and we would occasionally see people in bands kind of mooching around, whether it was Edgware Road, which was literally just along from where my school was. There was a cafe there, Stu, called the Metropolitan Cafe, which was a favourite port of call for Joe, Mick, Paul, and Topper. And then if you went down the other way of the street that our school was situated on, Bell Street, was Lisson Grove Dole Exchange, and you would occasionally see, members of the Slits or the Modettes kind of sort of mooching around as well. So this song just kind of takes me back to 77, 1978 it came out. It's just so evocative. I mean, I can get teary-eyed listening to this, and I mean, it starts with Mick kind of counting it in, and it just sort of sums up that mood of that time. And for me, I wanted to kind of get involved. I was 15 in 1977. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later on, Stu, but I think subconsciously, even as a kid, I was kind of waiting for something like punk to kind of happen, something that was going to be mine. And, thank God it arrived.
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in on that now, because I'm 49, and I kind of, when I was 15, I guess hip hop was happening, and acid house was happening, and living in Essex, the M25 was just up the road. There was all sorts of big beaming lights coming from all over the place, and I kind of missed that, really. I didn't get stuck into acid house, because I found the indie thing, and I was excited by that, and it was all a big melting pot at that point anyway. It was all kind of in the same pot.
Yes.
And I guess, you look at hip hop, and that ethos is as punk as fuck as anything that was happening in 77. But I think we'd advanced a little bit more as culturally, and we wasn't as easily shocked, But the furore you see whenever you look back at 77, and it doesn't matter how many times I've watched Bill Grundy, like, you do still think, God, that's a bit much. And it still seems shocking, which is ridiculous. But to have been 15 at that point and caught all of that, what a brilliant age to have just caught that excitement. Because at 15, like, that's the sweet spot in it, where, like, you're just finding yourself, you're just finding, like, your tribe of mates, and you're just finding what really fires you up. And to get punk at that point, I'm jealous, mate.
Well, you've put it so well, Stu. You really, really have. And I, as I mentioned, a little bit earlier, I think that subconsciously, prior to sort of first starting reading about these bands in the NME towards the end of 1976, I think that sort of subconscious, subconsciously I was waiting for something. I kind of got the Beatle bug, Stu, as a kid in about 75, 76. There was a TV series called All You Need Is Love. Fantastic history of pop TV series that was made by Tony Palmer, and there was this one edition that was completely devoted to the Beatles. And of course, I'd heard of them before that, and I'd liked some of the solo records that Paul McCartney and Lennon had put out, and George and Ringo as well. But when I saw that documentary, that really kind of blindsided me, absolutely hit me around the head with a mallet, and I was. Everything became about the Beatles for about a year, 2 years. I mean, I used to have to bribe if there was anything on the TV about the Beatles, and there was a series of films that the BBC did. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, in 1976, I would bribe my brother and sister, 20p or whatever, to keep quiet whilst they showed one of the Beatles films, and I would sit up next to the TV with my my cassette radio, recording the audio of it.
Wonderful.
I think I've still got them somewhere. So, you ever want me to sort of, kind of do a chunk of help or a hard day's night for you? So through getting into the Beatles, that made me go back even further. This is the thing that I love about music. It is, the journey, basically, and you listen to something like the Beatles, and then it takes you back, and whether it's the roots of rock and roll, or whether it's the mods and rockers, or the hippies, and then you start reading and listening to all of that stuff. So when punk happened, I quickly realized that this is for me, this is the audience that they want. And the artists, whether it was, the Clash or the Buzzcocks or the Jam or the Slits, they were only a couple of years older. And, you talked about, the kind of the outrage sort of side of things. I mean, I was never into the kind of negative side of punk, the nihilism, if you like. I think that's the word. I was always into the the kind of creative side. There were 3 words on the back of the some of your older listeners, Stu, will know this. There were 3 words on the back of the Jams All Around the World single: direction, reaction, creation. And I really kind of bought into that. So, the knock-on effect for me was that I wanted to get involved in some way, as did my school pals, Chris and Dave and Carl and others. So it was like, well, how are we going to get involved? And there seemed to be 2 obvious ways. The obvious way was obviously to start a band, and we'd kind of sort of tried that about a year previous to that. There was 1 guitar amongst 12 potential members, so that got sort of sidelined. But the other way was about writing about music, fanzines, which was such a big thing in 1976, 1977. So that's what we decided to do. We had a really cool English teacher, Stu, called Dave Meaden, who was very encouraging, and he basically allowed us to hijack our school magazine and kind of turn it into our punk fanzine. And
I mean, how good's that?
I know. I mean, honestly, you know what, Stu? I did something a couple of months ago, maybe last year. I did something over at the Exchange in Twickenham, and we've emailed each other a couple of times. He reached out via Facebook, so we kind of reconnected. And but a few months ago, at an event that I did over in at the Exchange, he was in the audience. Now, I hadn't seen him since I'd left school in 1978, and it was so emotional. I mean, I'm thinking about it now. I'm getting I'm welling up here a little bit, because he was such a lovely fellow, and I kept calling him Mr. Meaden. And he like, Gary, you can call me Dave now. You can call me Dave. But he was incredibly encouraging to me and my pals, and I'm sure you'll understand this. Anyone who's at school, a teenager, a bit of encouragement from a teacher can mean so much. And we've got a lot. I've certainly got a lot to be thankful for. And Stu, once once we decided that we were going to do it, we were away basically. And I know, some people might find this hard to believe, but I actually always thought of myself as being quite shy. But for some reason, I was always the one who was put in front of our little gang. And I was the one who it was decided would, go over to the phone box that was opposite our school at lunchtime and pick the phone up and basically ring round, the record companies, the PR people, and try and blag interviews, which I would, dutifully do. But what we did work out very, very quickly, Stu, was that once we started going to gigs early summer 1977, we sussed out that if you got there at about 5 o'clock, so I'm talking about venues like the Marquee or the 100 Club or the Vortex. We never got into the Roxy. They wouldn't let us in there. We decided that if you got there at about 5 o'clock when a band was sound checking, you could invariably kind of let yourself in. And once the band saw us, met us, they were normally, I can't think of any instances when any band was negative and told us to do one. Everybody was kind of like, who's this lot? This bunch of school kids. And, I'd have the cassette radio. I mean, it was a big old, it was like a small briefcase, really. And, we would sort of proceed to ask for an interview. Bless them, Generation X, the Jam, the clap, all of them would listen, hang around, stay with us, and then you can stay and watch the concert, So it really was, it really was a very special time, really. And I think for me to kind of see, that side of things, and occasionally popping into record companies and picking up an album or a biography or something like that, I thought I kind of quickly decided that I wanted to do something within music. And then I got a job as an office boy for a record company, and I was away.
Wonderful. We'll pick back up on that, but I'm going to take you back for track 2. Gary, tell me the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you.
Well, it's funny, Stu. My parents split up when I was 8, my sister was 6, and my brother was 10. And I've talked about this before, but I think pop music kind of became my thing. My brother had a group of pals, and Steve got into a few problems a little bit later. Nothing untoward, but my brother was very good at picking things up and not putting them back. But my sister, bless her, was very, very popular. She had a group of girlfriends who, and they were all into their pop music. Soul music was kind of like their thing, really. And once they got a little bit older, they were going to sort of clubs. But pop music for me, when I was about 8, 9 years of age, kind of became my thing. So it was, taping radio shows, taping songs onto my cassette. It was buying pop magazines, watching wherever I could sort of watch performances, so it was, oh God, just thinking some of the TV pop shows of the time, and anything and everything from the Geordie scene to Get It Together, till a little bit later, Mark Bolan's Tea Time Pop Show was absolutely fantastic. You'd also get the occasional performance on things like Magpie and Blue Peter. But Slade...
Are you got quite an obsessive personality, Gary? Like, do you like if you find a band or a scene, are you like in with both feet?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that I think, in hindsight, Stu, where I was really, really lucky was that, through this kind of love for people like Joe Strummer, Paul Weller, Terry Hall from the Specials, I wanted to sort of know, what they were listening to, what they were reading to, where they were buying their clothes. So, again, it sort of goes back to that sort of sense of journey that, pop music and your love of pop music can kind of take you on. Slade were one of the kind of first bands that really kind of resonated with me. I mean, they were so popular at school, and I love Noddy's voice. I mean, you know, that they were a hit making machine, and this song, which is like one of the latest singles that they wrote. I mean, I must have been about 11 or 12, I'm guessing, when Every Day came out, and that's the song that I've chosen, Stu.
It's a beauty, isn't it?
It really is. It's got a lovely kind of melancholic sort of vibe underpinning the whole thing, and you know, it's a love song. Listen, I didn't have a girlfriend until I was 17, 18 years of age, but this song just really sort of connected. So yeah, Slade were very, very special for me, very special. And it's lovely, actually, because I got to interview Noddy a few times over the years, and it's always nice to be able to say to someone, you know, I'm telling you, you know, your band, you know, really sort of touched my life.
Yeah, it's and you know what? It's for younger listeners that to this podcast that may not be particularly aware of Slade's back catalogue, like, you know, and are just known in your household for the Christmas song. Go and have a deep dig, because there's so much amazing music. I think Noel Gallagher summed them up perfectly. Years and years ago, I did an interview with him, and he was like, "Yeah, they make tunes for fucking geezers, but they look like fucking Diddy men." And I just thought, superb.
It's very good with the descriptions, Noel. But yeah, I mean, but the girls also liked them, though. I mean, I can remember, you know, the girls at my primary school liking them. Sue, my sister, you know, my favourite was Noddy, because, you know, that voice. I mean, it just sounds like he's been gargling with razor blades. Sue always fancied Jim Lee, who was the you know, the bass player in the band. And
it's impossible, Gary, when I look back now, to not see it as Vic and Bob, though. I can't not see them like that.
Well, yeah, no, I get where you're coming from, but like I said, listen, Stu, I'm of an age where I can remember, you know, that them sort of exploded onto you know, Supersonic, or, you know, whatever.
Well, they were Boot Boys first, weren't they?
What's that?
They were more like Boot Boys at first, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were. They yeah, a skinhead band. I think essentially that's the audience that they went for, and then they kind of, you know, evolved into this, you know, for want of a better term, this kind of sort of, you know, version of glam, really.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you know, very, very lucky thinking back to that time, you know, that kind of early 70s time, because it was, listen, even with this new compilation that I've done, you know, I've always been a fan of pop music, you know, and if there's a great pop record on the radio, whether it's Taylor Swift or whether it's, you know, Arctic Monkeys or whoever, you know, if it kind of resonates, if it hits with me, I'm not a snob about it. I'm not a snob about it, and I never have been, really. And you know, so you know, that's sort of something that's always sort of remained with me. And it's funny, you know, thinking about these choices, because there is a little bit of a 70s tinge to some of these for you, Stu. But, you know, that was the decade that kind of, you know, make of this man, really. So you know, that you know, that's what you've got, I'm afraid.
Tell me the track that reminds you of your time at school, please, Gary.
Well, you know, as we talked about a little bit earlier on, you know, I don't think I could have been, you know, at a better school, really. It's funny, Stu. I went a couple of Fridays ago to an old school pal of mine, a lovely fella called Mark Ely, who's done, you know, some amazing stuff with as far as, you know, teaching kids and dance, especially over in West London, not too far from where I live. The Portobello Dance School, I think it's called. And, you know, this evening that me and my other half went to was basically, you know, celebrating Mark and his sort of influence, his achievements. And Danny St. Jules was also there, who also used to go to my school. And you know, a lot of your you know, listeners will of course know him through Red Dwarf, and also, oh, what's it called, the one set out, the detective series, Stu, set out in the Caribbean. Is it Death in Paradise?
It is, yeah.
And he's a lovely, lovely lad. But it's funny. So we did a little bit of shtick on stage together, the three of us, and it just sort of suddenly dawned on me that our school, which was called Rutherford, it's now called something else now. It's just behind Edgware Road, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on. But it was a little bit of a fame academy in its own way, because, you know, you had Mark and Danny there. Phil Daniels, the actor, also went there. Courtney Pine, the saxophonist, also went there. It was a wonderfully eclectic, you know, diverse mix of school kids from different backgrounds, you know, because I grew up on the Lisson Green estate, and a lot of my school pals would have grown up on the avenues just off Harrow Road. So, you know, we were all bringing in sort of different records and different music. And especially, I remember when punk happened, you know, we had a common room then, because we would have been in the 5th year or 6th year then. So it was kind of like, you know, me trying to get, you know, my records played, and you know, my schoolmates playing, you know, the latest, I don't know, Bob Marley or dub album or something like that. But I wouldn't have had it anyway. It was such a good time. But the song that I've chosen is Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town, because, you know, pre-punk, Thin Lizzy, Quo, even, you know, people forget, you know, Quo were kind of cool in 1974, 1975. And, you know...
Dan Dan's a stone cold killer, mate.
It really, really is. And yes, in fact, I think Rain by Quo, and it's not the cover of the Beatles song. It is a song called Rain. Was one of the first records that I can actually remember buying. I mean, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, Stu, money was a bit tight growing up, so that trusty cassette radio machine, and also the transistor radio that my auntie, bless her, bought for myself. I got one, my sister got one, and my brother got one. And they were red, yellow, and blue. I had the yellow one. But those things were just so important, you know, as far as, you know, what we were listening to, you know, and you know, the cassette radio, I couldn't afford to buy a lot of records at that time. You know, very, very few, really. So it was a case of, you know, taping off the radio. So, you know, that's what we would do. You know, we'd listen to the chart rundown on a Sunday night. Tom Brown, I think, was the presenter. And even a little bit later, you know, when, you know, my taste kind of moved, sort of, you know, spread outwards, you know, listening to Peely, you know, listening to, you know, Nicky Horn had a show in London that played a lot of good music as well, called Your Mother Wouldn't Like It on Capital. You know, those programs were really, really important as far as, you know, kind of, yeah, sort of informing my musical taste.
I want to ask you, I generally ask guests now about, did they know what they wanted to be when they were at school? And you touched on it earlier, you know, that you wanted to do something within music, and obviously you never quite settled on the guitarist of the 12 and the one guitar. So, you know, writing becomes something. And then you just mentioned all of those people that had been to your school that have all gone on to have successful careers in the arts. And that whole time of punk being sort of very much entrenched in that DIY culture. And I know you said you weren't interested in the nihilism, it was more that kind of creative element of it. And with all of that in mind, because for me growing up in Essex, you know, I sort of look at around me and think, right, you know, I wanted to be a musician. Who was successful from where I was? You know, was it possible coming from Essex? Could you be a successful musician coming from Essex? But surrounded by the people you were surrounded by, and the opportunities that were there, and you know, even saying, like, walking down the street, you would see the Slits, or, you know, or you would see the Clash, and you know, for me growing up in the 80s, I was never going to bump into Duran Duran, like, you know, and so seeing all of that, did it give you that kind of confidence that, look, I can do this? Like, you know, it's all around me and everybody's having a go and everyone seems to be doing all right here.
Yes. No, that's a very, very important point, Stu. I think that have a go attitude was something that was one of the most important things for me about punk, new wave, that time, the late 1970s, and I think so many of us grabbed that and ran with it. Whether it was pals of mine who did go on to form a band, or myself, running the fanzine with a couple of pals, then deciding that that I wanted to kind of work in music, doing something. So I wrote to, I can remember, Stu, I wrote to all of the record companies at the time. I would have still have been at school, and I got two interviews. One was with this record label called Red Records, who had offices on Wigmore Street. And even when I walk past there now, I've got a vivid memory of going in there. The other one was Decca Records. Now, Decca in 1978, Stu, were probably the most uncoolest record label ever. They'd had these glory days of the 1960s, when they had Rolling Stones, and they also distributed Motown records, and so many other cool bands, Small Faces. They had the D-Ram label. The list goes on and on. Fast forward to 1977, and they've got the Smurfs. They got Moody Blues. Their only eight were bands like Cock Sparrow, who I wasn't really particularly a fan of. Adam and the Ants, they did a one-off single with, Young Parisians. But do you know what, Stu? I could not have chosen a better first job, because the offices were on Great Marlborough Street, number 18 Great Marlborough Street. The offices were on, I think it was the second floor, and it was the press and promotion department. The actual main offices, Stu, were down on Albert and Bankman. Basically, Decca was still going because the only reason while the organisation was still making money was because they had a thing called Decca Radar that made them an awful lot of money, because it was used, on ships all around the world. Also, I think, Decca TVs and radios were still making a little bit of money, but the record company was basically, gone to pot. But I was just working with a really, really interesting, very encouraging, bunch of people, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, I loved getting the bus down from the estate that I lived in down to Oxford Circus, jumping off the bus, walking past the London Palladium, onto Great Marlborough Street, walking along, and going into work every day was an absolute treat. And it was through that, actually, Stu, that I used to deliver records. Not that anyone at the New Musical Express was waiting for any of these new releases from Decca, but I used to go to the NME's offices on Carnaby Street and deliver these packages. And there were these two lovely ladies called Val and Fiona, who used to basically run the reception area and also do a lot of research for the newspaper. And Danny Baker would have been on the reception. And anyway, one day I walked in there, and Danny wasn't there that day. And Fiona said, "Look, Gary, Danny's going to work as a full-time staffer on the NME. Me and Val want you to replace him. Are you interested?" And as if she needed to ask me if I was interested. I mean, the NME for me, Stu, as a kid, for a couple of years previous to that, was everything. I mean, it really was the Bible. The way that we access music now, listen, I'm not hankering for those days, because of course, progress is mostly good. And you can sort of name check a Della Soul B-side or something, and we can get it up on the phone in the space of 10-15 seconds. But the enemy then was everything. You know, I would come into town on a Thursday. This is even previous to getting that job at Decca Records, and you know, kind of get there Thursday morning in order to buy the NME and Sounds and Melody Maker if I was particularly flush that week, and then, you know, getting it home and reading it and then reading it again and then going over it again and cutting out pictures and putting it on my bedroom wall. So to get a job there. Now, this is 79 now, Stu. 79. What a fantastic year. You know, you've had that amazing, you know, flurry, rush of punk in 1977. Then all this exciting post-punk stuff, 78, 79. 79, you've kind of got the mod revival thing going on, which I loved. The two-tone thing that was going on, which I loved. It's funny. Have you ever seen a Woody Allen film called Zelig?
Mm-hmm.
Which, you know, just in case your listeners haven't seen it, it's basically about this character who, if he's around, you know, somebody, maybe somebody from a different sort of nationality, ethnic background or something, he basically begins to look like them. I was a bit like that with Teenage Tribes. So I was into everything, Stu. I mean, you know, within reason, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, if I thought it was rubbish, I wasn't into it, but I was into most things or thought that there were good points about most things. Really, maybe not so much heavy metal, really. That never really did anything. Then again, I like Led Zeppelin, though. So, I mean, a Led Zeppelin heavy metal, well, that's a discussion for another day. But, you know, so to be on that reception desk in 1979, you know, with, you know, these amazing PR people, photographers, Penny Smith, Jill Furmanowski, the writers, Nick Kent, Charles Shaw Murray, Tony Parsons, Julie Burchill. I thought I died and kind of gone to heaven. You know, it was it really was an amazing time. And there's one memory, Stu, in particular. First day at work, Neil Spencer, who was the very, very cool, kind of laid back editor of the NME in that year, 1979, called me into his office, welcomed me to the newspaper, basically said, look, you're going to be the face of the NME, so, you know, you need to be kind of polite sort of thing, and you know, listen, I know you've got the enthusiasm for music. And anyway, he reached down underneath his desk, Stu, and pulled out this really, really cool kind of Dr. Martin's soul pair of loafers. So two-tone had exploded in 1979. He said, oh, by the way, these don't fit me. You know, I want you to have them. And I just remember coming home that day thinking, is it going to be like this every day? You know, it was just, you know, talk about the stuff of dreams.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Gary, tell me the first record you bought.
Okay. So the first one that I can sort of physically remember, you know, parting money with is Roxy Music and Both Ends Burning. I've got a vivid memory of standing in the queue with my sister, buying our fruit and veg on a Saturday mid-morning, Church Street Market, and it was right opposite a record shop that was to play an important part in my life called Giljay's. Long gone now. But we had a couple of good record shops around near where I lived, and you know, one of the other ones that I spent a lot of time at would have been the Virgin store, which was situated on Marble Arch, and of course the Rough Trade shop, which was over the first rough trade shop, which was over on Kensington Park Road. So those were my kind of sort of choices of record emporiums. But yeah, just got a vivid memory of being in the queue, buying fruit and veg, and they had a stall outside the record shop, Giljay's, and, you know, they put Both Ends Burning on, and I liked Roxy, I liked Brian Ferry, and I just remember sort of hearing that, and, you know, my ears kind of pricking up. And I had the money in my pocket at the time. I think it was about 75 pence or something. I was trying to think about how much a single would have cost back in the mid 1970s. And I said to my sister Sue, I said, listen, you take the stuff back home. I'm going to go and buy this record. Loved this. So that would have been the first one.
Did you manage to go and see Roxy the other week?
No, I didn't, unfortunately. Just gathering on what I've seen people posting on social media. It's been mostly very, very positive. So
Mm.
yeah, a little bit of a regret there. Don't suppose there's going to be too many chances to see them in
That's
the
it.
future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's a stupid question asking you, Gary, how important record shops were, in the formative years of you as a person, and obviously as as being a key part of crate digging for your career. You know, tell me some sort of tell me like in those early days, moving forwards a little bit into the sort of like the late 80s and the early 90s. Where was your record shop in them?
Well, it would have been sort of kind of here, there, and everywhere, really.
At this
I mean,
point, was you getting sent vinyl and stuff? I
well,
presume you was being sent a lot.
I would have been, Stu. So yeah, fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s. I would have been spoiled, really,
Mm,
if the truth be known, because I started on the radio at the beginning of 1982,
mm.
and very, very quickly, much to my dad's, bless him, annoyance, so much stuff used to come to the flat. It's funny, actually, Stu, I was telling somebody about this the other day. We were one of the last people that I knew who had an actual physical phone in our flat on this estate in Lisson Grove. And I had to beg my father to let me have the phone. He was adamant. I don't want a phone. I don't want people ringing up knowing my business. My dad was of old school. And I said, look, Dad, Capital Radio have said that I have to have a phone, just in case, last minute calls, yada, yada, yada. And then, no, it's not going to happen. No, change the subject. No, not going to happen. And then the thing that got him, that swayed it for him, I said, Dad, Capital have said that they'll pay for it. And then he changed his mind. Funny that he changed his mind. But yeah, so literally, as soon as I've been on air for a few weeks, a month, I was so spoiled. So much stuff kind of sent my way, and that has kind of continued in a way, Stu, really, right up to right up to now. But as far as kind of records are concerned, at that time, late 80s, early 90s, I was probably, Stu, only having to kind of buy the oldies that I once wanted. So the record and tape exchanges,
Yeah.
which were kind of scattered around London. I think there's still a few. There's still a few kind of still with us. So those all would have been very, very important. I was very, very lucky. That kind of period in time. I had a girlfriend who was living out in Los Angeles, so I'd sort of go out and see her occasionally, and bring back stuff as well. But it's funny with vinyl, Stu. I made a conscious decision, I think, when I was about 14, 15. I made a conscious decision that when I got into the Beatles, I knew that I was not going to be able to to afford to buy everything, because it was just this kind of never-ending bottomless pit, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I've never been a vinyl junkie. It's funny because one of my best pals is a lovely lad called Jim Lahat, who I met through working on the show that I presented back in the 90s on GLR. And in fact, Jim also came over to XFM, and we're working on a project at the moment. It's going to be another GC Punk and New Wave compilation. We've almost finished it, and I think that these have worked because I'm kind of bringing to the party what I remember, and maybe the artists were a little bit more populist, if you like, but not the obvious tracks, so it will be a B-side, it will be an album track that maybe I thought, could have easily have been a single, whereas Jim is the vinyl head. I mean, Jim's kind of got this kind of record collection. I mean, I wouldn't even like to hazard a guess as far as what the worth of it is concerned. But like I said, so I think I made that kind of decision sort of very early. Listen, I've still got a room full of my kind of favorite stuff, but I'm not a kind of diehard, kind of crate digger who sort of gets the theremins get going because of the smell of vinyl or anything like whereas Jim Jim really is, you look up the definition of vinyl junkie, and his picture should probably kind of pop up.
Well, for the next question, Gary, where we talk about clubbing, the new compilation, let's talk about that now, because for me that's my clubbing. Like, so I don't know if you know, but I've run a venue and DJ'd a venue for 30 years. I run a venue called the Pink Toothbrush in Rayleigh, and
got history, isn't it? That building,
it has, It used to be called Crocs, and the aforementioned Danny Baker come down and made a big feature for the 6 o'clock show, interviewing Depeche Mode and seeing the alligator that wasn't actually. We did have an alligator. It wasn't a crocodile that was in the club. It wasn't an actual alligator. But yeah, so for me, I mean, I just look at the new compilation, Gary, and you've kindly sent me a sampler of it, and the opening track is "A Wish Away" by the Wonder Stuff, which you talk about pop music, right? And I now want to just, I mean, I've been lucky. I've had Miles on this show. I think Miles Hunt is one of the most underrated pop songwriters in history. You grab the best of the Wonder Stuff, or any of them, 3 albums, they're all absolute stone cold pop classics. Like absolute, I think he's so underrated, and I love to see this kind of period of. I mean, it goes throughout the 90s as well, but there's a thing, Gary, that and we used to come to lots of your gigs where you'd pay about £8 and you'd see like 3 like absolute banging bands on one night, and what music history looks back not very fondly, I think, and I don't know why. It skips 1990 to 1992. It's like Manchester happened, and it was super exciting, and then we go straight to Seattle in 1992, and then we come back to England in 1995. It's like, whoa, what about Carter, the Wonder Stuff, Ned's Atomic Dust Pop? What about Jesus Jones? What about EMF that had #1s in America? You know, like what happened? And I find that scene was, I mean, I'm probably looking back on it so funny because it was probably when I was sort of 16, 17, and it was so exciting for me. But I do think there was some incredible music like being put out by British bands that, do you know what I'm saying? When it kind of gets forgotten, that kind of period.
I think sometimes, Stu, I don't know what you think, but sometimes I think a bit of distance, does give us time to sort of kind of look back and appraise. I mean, this compilation, this indie 90s playback 3 CD compilation that I've done was always in the back of my head, Stu, when I did the very first punk and new wave compilation, and then I did the Lost 80s one, and this was the obvious kind of follow-up, because I do have a fondness for this for this time. I was having a great time as far as what I was the people that I was working with on the radio shows. A couple of really nice guys who I work with. Lovely fella called Tony Smith, who later went on to start Deceptive with Steve Lamacq and Alan James. In fact, Tony Smith is is all over this compilation, because it was Tony who actually came up with the idea for a feature that was associated with that GLR show called the Demo Clash. So, you know, we couldn't invite bands in to do sessions because there just wasn't the money, and, you know, not really the facilities at the time. And Tony said, I'll tell you what we'll do. Every band has got a demo cassette. What we'll do is we'll ask them to send in, you know, their 2 or 3 favorite tracks. We'll each take turns to listen to these to these bags of cassettes. And honestly, Stu, it you know, they came in these kind of Royal Mail sacks. You know, and that kind of went on for a couple of years, and that was Tony's idea. But yeah, I mean, I remember the 90s myself as, you know, a bit like the 80s in a way, really, you know, very eclectic, you know, very diverse. So as you mentioned, you know, the late 80s, you know, you had the Stuffies and you know, you had that sort of, you know, the first Stone Roses album, which was a game changer, you know, Manchester. And again, as you said, and then this kind of wave of, you know, kind of grungy, punky American bands, you know, then Suede, of course.
Suede's the game changer. I think Suede's the kind of thing that I remember, like, being very much excited by, and being, I guess most of my listening at that point probably was lots of the American things. I got really involved in, you know, in your James Addictions and all sorts of stuff like that. And then I remember just seeing Suede and going to see Suede quite early on as well. And it was completely like nothing I'd seen before. I was like, right. So this is the closest I'm going to get to seeing Smiths on a Bowie. Like, this is so exciting. And I think it was I don't know, it was very London. It was grimy, it was seedy, it was sexy, and it was like, wow. And I think that definitely kicked off. I mean, people talk about Blur Oasis with Britpop, and I think the seeds were sown with them, and maybe the Auteurs as well, early on as well.
Yeah,
like, them kind of bands. But
yeah,
Suede.
where did you see them, Stu? Where did you? And obviously Bernard was on guitar.
Oh yeah. So I'm at the Forum very early on. Where else did I see him? I actually see him not long ago. I went and saw him at Ali Pali, and I tell you what, like, I saw him at quite a few years on, and they looked like they'd fallen out of love with it a little bit. And I saw him at the Ali Pali, in between the breaks in lockdown, and I tell you what, Gary, it was like, I felt like I was 18 again. It was so exciting. They played Coming Up in Full, and they played a load of other hits, and he's such a good frontman. Such a good frontman. And and they were just on fire. And I think the new record.
Yes, I was going to say the new album.
So exciting.
Oh, yeah, they've got the bit between their teeth, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and again, listen, I can echo your sentiments, you know, exactly. I mean, you know, I think I saw them at that pub they used to play in Hampstead. I also remember seeing them at Jonathan and Eco's Tuesday night at the Camden Palace, and going with a pal of mine who actually was working for Sony Music, I think, in America at that time. And all the things that you just said, he was, you know, you could not take your eyes off him. And you know, Bernard was just, you know, this amazing, you know, guitarist. I mean, that they looked so cool. I mean, yeah, you know, it was just real hair on the back of the neck stuff.
I think I saw him was it the Old Track in Windsor? Like, I think I saw him there.
Yeah. I mean, Stu, they were one of the first. They were one of the first bands that we played on that feature, the Demo Clash, and this is quite funny, Stu, because even to this day, so basically the gist of the Demo Clash was that we would play 2 cassettes, and then the listeners would decide which band would come back the following week. Now, of course, every band and every band's mother and father and sister and brother and friend would call in and vote for the for the band to win. And even to this day, Stu, if I see Bernard, or if I see Matt, or if I see Brett, the first thing they say to me, 224-2000, 224-2000, which was the Demo Clash hotline number that they had to call. So I saw Bernard about a month or so ago at the Altered Images concert, and first thing he said, "All right, Gary, 224-2000." So
that's right, because he's worked with Claire Grogan on that record, hasn't
yes,
he?
yeah, I think he's collaborated. He's produced about two or three tracks on the new album. Yeah,
wonderful.
But yeah,
there's a band I want to talk about just briefly on the compilation, which is. And I used to go my sort of local venue. If they weren't playing my place, we'd go to a place called the White Club. And there was a promoter called John Dunn that used to put on these super exciting bands in Chelmsford. And one of those bands I got to see very early on, and it blew my mind what they looked like, what they sounded like. And you've put the right track on as well. You've got Instant Repeater by the Soundtrack of Our Lives. That track is off the scale good.
It really, and again, we were talking about XFM a little bit earlier on. There's a whole kind of cluster of tracks. I mean, all of these tracks, I've got memories. Either I would have played at GLR, or I would have played at XFM, and the Soundtrack of our lives is one that I associate with XFM. I only saw them the once. I mean, we mentioned Noel Gallagher a little bit earlier on. I mean, he was
Oasis,
a massive,
didn't they?
Yeah, he absolutely adored them. They were Swedish. And I got to see them once, Stu. But what a venue to see them in, and that was the Borderline, just off the Charing Cross Road, and when you kind of get that, you kind of get that that kind of moment when a band is sort of in sync with the audience, and this energy is kind of pouring back and forward. So I'll always remember that. And as you said, it really is one of those records that is just so jaw-droppingly good. Those who know. And it was, as soon as I started thinking about this, it's kind of disappeared a little bit into the mist of time, and I just thought that's got to be on it, and that it's funny, Stu, the company that that's very kindly put this out together for us is a company called Wiener World, and there's a lovely lady there called Laura, and I'm not sure whether Laura's sort of knowledge of alternative independent music, whatever you want to call it, is too big. But I get these emails from her every now and then saying, right, we've just had the Soundtrack of Our Lives cleared, or the High, or Definition of Sound, and it was just, they were just the best emails to kind of get, really, because obviously you want it to be as good as your original idea. And honestly, Stu, touch wood, all of the compilations that I've done, we haven't had to put something on that I felt, oh well, okay, maybe we'll put that. It's all been stuff, as I said, with a specific memory attached to it.
Lovely. Well, I'm going to ask you for some memories on clubbing. What's the song that soundtrack your year's clubbing, Gary?
Yes. Okay. So well, I suppose clubbing, I'm going to take you right back to the beginning. But do you know what, Stu? It's not often that I kind of play out nowadays. But having said that, I'll do a couple of things over a year with some pals, because it's just one way of kind of getting to see everyone in one hit. But the record that I've chosen is Candy Statton's Young Hearts Run Free, which I've got a vivid memory of hearing for the first time in a youth club that we used to go to just off the Harrow Road called the Stowe Club. And not that I was a dancer or anything then, certainly didn't have a girlfriend, but I just absolutely loved that record. My sister had it as well. It was on the Warner Brothers, the old Warner Brothers label, and it's just this very nearly was my kind of opening, my favorite opening track as well, but I moved it down a little bit because it's just absolutely life affirming. It's if you don't dance to this, then I think you need to kind of check your pulse to see if you're still alive. Really, it's just so feel good. I still drop this every time I DJ. Normally it's the first track that I play, and you can almost sort of feel that sort of whoosh in the room. So
that's joy. That is, it's joyous. That record.
That's the word. Yeah, definitely. And do you know what, Stuart? I mean, it's one. You talk about clubbing memories. So we talked a bit earlier on about getting the punk bug in '77. So for me, the late '70s, it was kind of really about going to gigs, getting that bus, the 159 as it was then, down to Oxford Street and going to the 100 Club and the Marquee and all those places, the Lyceum. But early '80s, then the kind of emphasis was basically back on the dance floor, and it was about going to the WAG club and lots of other sort of clubs of that time. The WAG always loomed large in my memory. I mean, I loved it there, and I mean it was open for a couple of decades, and Candy Staton, Young Hearts Run Free, you would hear maybe Steve Lewis or maybe Hector or somebody playing it. It was and still is. It's lost none of its oomph.
Yeah, it's a perfect record. It really is. Yeah. I'm going to take you home for track 6. Favourite song from an artist from your home county, please, Gary.
Okay, so we've talked about this new compilation, this 3 CD set, Stu, Indie 90s Playback. And I've decided to choose, again, another record that takes me back to, to broadcasting on GLR and also on XFM. A 4-piece from London called Silver Sun. And, I love pop music. We've been talking about that, obviously, since we came on. I mean, these guys were... you could just tell that they were, massive kind of pop fans. I mean, it just absolutely exudes, it just pours out of everything that they do. And they're one of those bands that, me and Jim have this sort of chat every now and then. And I also occasionally do it as a throw out with the radio show. Which artists, which bands do you feel should have been bigger, should have been given more love? And these guys, you can bet your bottom dollar, always get a mention. So yeah, Silver Sun, I think they went on to record a couple of albums, before imploding. I think that they would occasionally come back together again. Sadly, James, who was the the band's main singer and guitarist, very sadly passed away a few years ago. In fact, Richard from the band actually reached out to me quite recently because they were putting together some kind of tribute night for him, but unfortunately I was working that night and I was unable to make it. But we talked about Candy Staton and Young Hearts Run Free just being joyous. I think this for me is kind of like another interpretation of that word in a way. Really, it's power pop. It's biting, edgy power pop that for me, despite the passing of time, has lost none of its shine. And again, when Laura would have emailed and said, "There we go, we've got a couple of more tracks cleared," and this one would have been mentioned, I knew it was going to be a good day that day.
I've got quite a banana story about Silver Sun, Gary.
Oh, go on.
So I'd gone to London with a couple of pals, and I phoned my pal this morning to cross-reference this because I was like, I'm sure I'm sure it was Silver Sun. I went to watch this band, and we finished the band, and we was like, right, and we was walking through, and we ended up. You mentioned the Virgin Records building, so we come out of by the Virgin Megastore, and they must have dropped their album that day. And I don't know if you recall this. They spray painted 3 cars with the word Silver Sun and left them outside the Virgin Megastore. Just left them in the mid, like on the pavement. And we had a couple of drinks and walked past them, and I was like, "Oh, Silver Sun must be doing this publicity stunt." This is like 11 o'clock at night, and I remember my mate Steve just undoing the door and going, "The keys are in it." We drove off up Oxford Street or whatever. Is it Oxford Street, the Virgin Megastore? I think it was Oxford Street. Drove off up the road. There was 3 cars, and we drove off up the road in one of the Silver Sun's old bangers that they'd sprayed up and left outside the Virgin Megastore. It was it was class. As soon as I see on your list it was Silver Sun, I was like, I'm sure that's what the car was that was left outside the Megastore.
Lovely. Oh, yeah, you win the Silver Sun story. Yeah, that's a goodie. But again, you know, with a lot of these kind of bands spread across this, you know, recent compilations, Stu, so many of them, you know, could have been bigger, but for whatever reason, you know, that they weren't. So it's nice just to sort of kind of put the spotlight back on them.
And it's great to have Pulp on there as well. And obviously they've just announced as well that they're going to be playing some shows back together.
Yeah. I mean, again, you know, my defining memory, I mean, always the first memory, you know, you know, that's always one that's gonna sort of resonate. And I remember, oh God, what was the name of the guy, the plugger, who was looking after Fire record stuff, because that record came out on Fire, if my memory serves me correctly. My Legendary Girlfriend we're talking about, and I just, you know, I remember hearing that and you know, just doing that double take. It just didn't sound like anybody else at the time. And you know, I saw that they were playing the Underworld in Camden, you know, and it was one of the best decisions that I made that year. I went on my own, which I'm actually pleased in hindsight that I did, because, you know, I didn't have a mate there or anybody sort of, you know, distracting me. So it was all eyes focused on, you know, the band, and, you know, just coming away sort of massively impressed. I knew that I'd seen something very, very special. You know, you couldn't take your eyes off Jarvis. He was incredibly funny and droll. You know, when you've kind of been around as much as me, Stu, I remember, you know, that night thinking, God, he reminds me a little bit of Edwyn Collins, you know, from Orange Juice. I remember seeing Orange Juice sort of luckily very early doors, and Edwyn had this kind of lovely sort of, you know, dry, lopsided take on the world, and you know, instantly kind of falling in love with that, almost as much as the songs really at that time. And Jarvis, it was a very, very similar appeal. You know, he had this kind of dry wit, he kind of pulled you in, and you know, you were sort of looking at the world through you know, through his glasses really. And you know, I reckon it was probably about a third, half full or something that night. But you know, listen, you would have seen it, you know, your listeners would have seen it. You know, every now and then you see something, you know, and you just know this is something a little bit, you know, whatever it is, what you want to call it, they've got it. I mean, of course, you know, they would have already been around for 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
Previous to that time that I saw them in the early 90s. But yeah, that track just had this kind of lovely, sort of scuzzy, kind of Barry White sort of vibe to it, really. And it's only kind of recently that you know, I know that, you know, when they first started doing this song, I think Barry White was somewhere within the title of the song before, you know, because of the feel of the song. But yeah, I mean, you know, fantastic track, and the way that it builds as well is just absolutely just builds to this, you know, kind of wonderful sort of epic.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'm having such a lovely time talking about music, and you mentioned him earlier. He's been on the podcast twice. He's such a lovely guy. You're going to be talking music with the delightful John Kennedy, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah, that's actually happening this Sunday afternoon, and I messaged him yesterday, Stu, and because originally I was going to jump up on stage and play some tracks and sort of talk about the memories that they ignited, and then I thought, do you know what? Just get John up. Let's do it like a radio program, and I've always been a big fan of his, and if anyone has kind of got that sort of mantle that Peely had and that influence, I think John's got to be right up there. I love his enthusiasm, his knowledge, certainly blows mine. Many people's out of the water, but like I said, most importantly, that kind of passion, and just been listening to him, really since my first memory of hearing John. Tony Smith, who I mentioned a little bit earlier on, Stu, who was my producer. Tony was doing bits and pieces, presenting bits and pieces for Q102, and he would kind of occasionally sort of slip me a cassette and say, "Oh, you should listen to this," and of course Q102 subsequently evolved into XFM, and John, would have been one of the presenters on that. I think I've got that right, and just love that kind of that passion. So I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing his radio memories, his stories, his favorite interviewees, maybe the ones that weren't so good, and just getting the kind of the music bug really. So yeah, stroll on Sunday. I'm really looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, you get to do now what you've done for the last God knows how many years now, Gary. You get to be a tastemaker and an influencer, the kids call it now. And I'm going to ask you to recommend a track that you think our listeners may not have heard that you'd like them to hear.
Well, I hope I've got this right with this choice, because this album came out about sort of just under 10 years ago, and it's an album that takes me back to a good time in my life, seeing this beautiful girl at the time who's still funny as anything. She's a Geordie, and still a really, really good pal. And this album reminds me of driving over to see her in Southwest London, and playing it summer into winter, and it's still an album that I still love to play, at least 3-4 times a year. I'm talking about a band called Cashier Number 9, who were a Belfast band, made 2 albums. I think I'm right in saying this first album, though, this is the album that I always say to people, if we're talking music, have you heard this album? To the Death of Fun is the title of the album. Some people have heard it. A lot of people haven't, but it's just, absolutely kind of life affirming, really. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to sort of think the best way to kind of describe it. I mean, if you can imagine, I don't know, the Byrds kind of in a garage with the Stone Roses, and they were produced by David Holmes, who's touched some fantastic music over the years, then who knows, it might come out sounding like Cashier Number 9. I mean, it honestly, I think there's about 11 songs on there, Stu, and everyone is an absolute corker. So it's got lots of different sort of shades, and different moods as well. But I love it. I listened to it again a couple of days ago, and was just reminded of its brilliance. So if you haven't heard it, you might have done, but if you haven't heard it, if you get an hour in your day, Cashier Number 9's To the Death of Fun is right up there as far as I'm concerned.
Gary, we make it really easy for people to listen to it because we put together a little Spotify playlist to accompany the podcast with all your choices and some of the other songs that we've spoken about today. We'll throw them all on there so people can go and have a good listen. And if people want to go and listen to the new compilation or the previous compilations, how do they do that?
Well, I mean, obviously Amazon is the easy one, amazon.co.uk. But obviously, if you can support your local music emporium, that is so important. I'd like to sort of think that that they would be available there as well.
Lovely stuff, Gary. I knew this was going to be a lot of fun. Honestly, mate, thanks so much.
Honestly, I really, really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you asking me. And if I have any ideas of anyone who I think might be a good guest for you, is it okay if I pass on your details?
That would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.
All right, I really enjoyed that. It was lovely.